Um, when the whole notion of a emissions trading system was mooted, and then we had most recently the Fit for 55 package, and we had everything about what the Commission was doing on the front page of the Economist, and everyone saying this is the boldest package for any federal system or coming together of member states to do something on scale. And then suddenly, not only do we have corona and economic crisis, we now have the Ukraine invasion. And whilst prices of carbon by ton went to a peak in February of over 90, they slumped a little bit and they're back up to about 76 or so. And one thought that actually there's decoupling taking place between energy prices and what you do about emissions and taxes and the trading system. It feels as if it's all over the shop at the moment, because what we do know is there's no reliability or predictability about gas supply or energy supply. We have someone that's holding us by the neck, if you like, metaphorically, in terms of gas supplies. Prices are going up, they're already high, and we're looking at a precipice of huge amounts of poverty and a depth of poverty, especially amongst those who are the poorest in our communities. And so we're left with the dilemma of what do? We have a target for making massive reductions by 2030 and 2050. We have an emissions trading system that is a tool, a big policy tool, to see how we can get the big polluters to pay and make sure they reduce. We're looking at different ways of reducing emissions. And then finally, at the moment, there's proposals to extend the system to housing, let's say, and other forms of infrastructure such as rail. And what will that do to citizens in terms of prices? And will they be the ones who end up paying the cost of carbon reduction rather than the big companies? So together with a range of panelists who are going to debate some of these issues, I'm going to kick off with a key person who's from the European Commission. Her name is Beatriz Yordi, and she's well placed for this conversation. So I'm going to make sure I get it right. So she's a Director of Carbon Markets, Clean Mobility at the European Commission, and Director-General for Climate Action. So a really warm welcome to you, Beatriz. How are you? And safe and well, I hope.
All well here. Thanks a lot, Dharmendra. Very nice to see you.
Lovely to see you. I'm going to ask that really straightforward question. What's the point, Beatriz, if we've got what's going on at the moment in the world with this level of unpredictability, and we know that this system would have been fine in all other times, but is it gonna work when you think about the current context of fluctuating prices and access? Is there any point to the ETS?
There is a clear point, and a point even stronger than ever. I mean, carbon pricing, let's do not forget, carbon pricing, it was born as a carbon signal, as a market signal to decarbonize. The big question is, do we, in this very difficult geopolitical situation that we are, in this Ukraine war, in this invasion, is it decarbonization and independency of fossil fuels, is it stronger? Or shall we just stop our climate law commitments? For us, what we think in the Commission, and we have presented European Union, and our leaders are in this strong path of decarbonization, is that a carbon pricing and the market signals is not the time to just put it out. Is the time, I mean, we need to insist that the Green Deal is a path for independency on fossil fuels. And it's not only that it is of course a climate instrument, and these last times we have learned a lot in what crises, emergencies, pandemia are. Let's do not forget that climate crisis is also there with floods and droughts and extreme weather events. But it's that Green Deal has this geopolitical importance. I mean, for those that we have been in years working in renewable energies or in green innovation or in carbon markets, we know that reality comes back in a stubborn way with the importance of security of supply. It's a concept that we tend to forget, and we should not forget. So the answer is, with this context, and we know that high prices could be suffering for many, And we have, before Ukraine invasion, we were at numbers of more than 30 million citizens in Europe on what we call energy poverty. So we need also to take measures to soften the prices. We need to take care that in these tough times that no one is left behind. But we should not forget that carbon pricing is a pillar in this decarbonization path, and the decarbonization path has enormous advantage on security of supply.
Sure, Beatriz, thank you very much. I want to bring you back in afterwards, but think about this, and I want to ask all of you, use the chat, the Zoom chat. I can see a couple of you already started. So Sika and Doug, thank you very much for very interesting, especially Doug, a very interesting point you're making there, and speakers may want to look at it, but do get involved in the Zoom chat because we do record it and keep it and deal with it in terms of recommendations for the future. But the question is, Beatriz, you say what you say, but in terms of how the private sector is behaving and how the markets are behaving, it feels like, no one's in control of this, other than the fact that we have the highest shortage of gas supplies in Europe than we've ever had in our history, and the highest prices. But perhaps we'll come back to you on that note later, because it must make you scratch your head that why have an ETS in the times that we are, and also why have we not been I suppose ahead of our time in terms of thinking about supplies and not diversifying our sources ahead of time. But let me, on that note, go to Alexandre. Alexandre, thank you very much. You from EDF, a warm welcome to you.
Hey, good afternoon.
Good afternoon. A fantastic backdrop that you have there, Alexandre. And on the note of that backdrop, what I wanted to ask you is that, what do you expect from policymakers on carbon pricing? You've just heard from Beatriz, right, that it's important, it can manage or respond to the situation we're in. What do you want from them? Because at the end of the day, we've just come out of 24 months or more of public taxpayers underwriting citizens and the private sector. We're in a situation where we're going to get the highest prices for energy, and people are feeling the pain already, and people are not going to, they're going to default, and they're having a choice between fuel or food. But from your point of view, what are you looking for from policymakers on carbon pricing?
Actually, I'm very much reassured by what I heard from Beatriz, and she said that the EU ETS is central to EU climate policy. It's the strongest carbon price signal that we have in the EU, I have been involved in this market for quite some time, longer than I would care to say, actually. And this market has been through ups and downs, and I think we can all say now that it works quite well in the way it is structured, in the way the mechanisms have been put in place to make sure that it provides a credible signal to drive low carbon investments in a predictable manner. So the key for us is to make sure that we don't add unpredictability to this very unpredictable context. And in that sense, we support most of the measures that have been put forward in the package for the ETS reform. Of course, we could add for more predictability. We could advocate for the introduction of a carbon price floor or a price corridor. I think this is a kind of discussion we could be having in the current circumstances. We could possibly enhance the way the MSR works to further enhance the predictability of the system. But I think we have a fairly good basis for discussion at the moment. And we should refrain probably from the temptation of any intervention on the EU ETS market to try and make the EU ETS a tool to mitigate what we see today in the energy markets in terms of high prices or volatility in energy prices. And in that regard, some of the proposals that have been discussed to use the MSR as a mitigator should be very, very carefully handled, we think.
Alexandre, thank you very much. And again, something for you to consider and the audience. When we have got, we are hostage to fortune in terms of supplies. We haven't diversified our supplies. We don't know what's going to happen in the next 10 days. How do you continue? And how credible is it to say, actually, let's continue with this system and, carry on our merry way, but we don't know where the supply is going to come from when we can't switch as quickly? And then what do you say to the ordinary citizen that's going to actually make very difficult choices in their everyday lives? So something for you to all think about. I'm going to open it up to you, audience, for questions. So as I said, please do raise your hands if you want to engage. And whilst you think about asking one of your questions, I would like to basically take a question from our Debating Europe Citizens platform. It has over 5.5 million citizens that engage with us on issues that matter to them, and we engage politicians and others into discussion, the discussions that matter to them and issues of the day. So we've kind of posted this debate and raised some of these questions. So we have a question from Andras from Hungary, and it's to you, Beatriz. The question is, can the EU's energy dependency be harmonized with our values and our security priorities? What's the right direction? Over to you, Beatriz.
Thanks a lot for the question. It's a time that to talk about European values has a kind of dramatic context, and I would have loved that it doesn't exist, this dramatic context, but here we are. Just let me just recall Paris Agreement, and Paris Agreement is part of our values, part of our European values. Solidarity is also part of our European values. Just let me drop that's from the ETS and land on the ETS as a selfish landing. ETS last year, apart from providing a market signal, has put in the hands of member states more than 30 billion euros. And these 30 billion euros have been used for solidarity, have been used for investing in renewable energy, in energy efficiency, in modernization of Hungarian electricity and energy system. And so there is this second part of solidarity that it's absolutely compatible with the Green Deal, and that the Green Deal can accelerate. And then the last one, which is the resilience. We have the COVID coming to Europe, to the world, and something that I'm proud of, and I repeat it because I think it is important that citizens know, of course energy experts, but also citizens, is that the injection in the economy that we have put, the 700 billion injection in the economy, the recovery plan to recover the European economy from the suffering of COVID. It's we propose that how we pay the debts, it will come from part from ETS and part from CBAM, from the carbon border adjustment. So the solidarity elements are part of our values. I think that a harmonized market signal is part of our European values.
Excellent. Thank you very much for that, Beatrice. And let's see what our citizens make of that answer when it's posted back into the platform. And we look forward to the reaction to that. We have Adrien. Adrien, you've posed quite an interesting question. And that sounded really terrible because I'm assuming that none of the other questions are interesting. I didn't mean like that. Adrien, do you want to come onto the screen and introduce yourself and just say what your question is so that we can make sure the rest of the virtual panel can hear what you have to say? Is it Doug? Sorry, Doug. It's Doug Crawford. I got the name wrong. Are you still there, Doug? You posted something on the Zoom.
Yeah, sorry, I was on mute for a moment there.
But also, I called you Adrien. So, you know, hey.
That's okay. I would say I've been called worse, but that sounds terrible for Adrien. I don't mean it that way. I don't mean it that way, Adrien.
It's
Sorry.
faux all round. So, Doug.
Yeah, so actually, Adrien has partially answered this question for me by pointing me towards an article that I had just glanced at a bit too rapidly. But what most of the research shows is that if you're going to have carbon reduction that's significant, equally importantly, and sometimes more important than the price of the carbon, is what happens to the revenue. So here in the UK, that revenue at the moment is simply going into the general treasury, and it can't be ring-fenced for low carbon solutions. And as a result, in the macro economy, you could end up actually increasing the CO2 emissions as a result of the carbon price revenue. So I'm wondering what the speakers think about this issue of not just how large is the carbon price, but where is that money going?
Okay, excellent. Thank you very much. So I'll bring both Beatriz and Alexandre into that question later. But if we don't have any further questions or hands up, I'm going to move on to our next panelist. And perhaps he can also respond to that particular point that you've just made, Doug, on where does the money go from this system, and should it be ring-fenced for, you know, carbon reduction technologies and the benefit of more and better solutions rather than simply going into the national budget. So our next speaker is Peter Wittoeck, Head of Climate Change at the Belgian Federal Public Health Service, Food Chain Safety and Environment. A very warm welcome to you, Peter.
Thank you. Hello.
Tell us, the question for me that occurs to me is how to address the potential distributional effects of carbon pricing amongst member states, because we know that there is an inherent inequality between member states and there's inherent capability issues across member states. How do we deal with the distributional effects of what we're encountering? And obviously you're speaking from a Belgian perspective, so be interesting to see how you're managing. Over to you, Peter.
Yes, thank you. Really follows up very nicely to the question Doug just asked, because obviously, if you introduce a carbon price in any sector, what you're also introducing, of course, is revenue for the authority raising this carbon price through a tax or whatever means. And in the case of the European Emission Trading Scheme, for these new sectors, buildings and road transport, the revenues of a carbon price in those sectors would come back to the member states to a large extent, or would go back to the member states in general. 25% of those, or the equivalent of 25% of those revenues, would go through, in the Commission's proposals, to the Social Climate Fund, which is there to distribute not only these revenues equitably among member states, but also within member states to those groups in our societies and our economies which are the most economically vulnerable. So that's already, I think, an important part of the answer there. There's also the Modernization Fund, of course, which is also funded through the Emission Trading Scheme, and which favors those transforming the energy system in those member states that are less wealthy. So that basically the point is that the system itself has the potential to compensate for any unwanted distributional impacts, both between member states and certainly also, because certainly in Belgium, in the current energy crisis, that is really at the core of the political debate within member states between different income groups in case of households. There are, of course, other elements that come into play as well. But one of the previous speakers already spoke about one possibility of further reducing the impact of a carbon price, which is thinking about some things like a price corridor where you can combine predictability, the impact of a carbon price towards investments, and ensuring that in future we become less vulnerable to the energy crisis we're suffering now, and on the other hand, and that is the ceiling part of the corridor, avoid excessive price peaks that would be caused by the carbon price itself. I said that in Belgium this aspect of the distributional aspects of carbon pricing, and now in the context of the proposed ETS BRT is politically very sensitive, and we have been working from the administration side in tempore non suspecto before the new commission actually came into place about ways of dealing with that. And frankly, if you do it in an intelligent way, it is perfectly possible to not only avoid negative distributional impacts, but in fact generate a positive impact through one of the things we've been looking at is a lump sum transfer of part of the income generated by the carbon price to all households. So the same lump sum would go to all households, and richer households consuming more energy and therefore paying more in terms of a carbon price would actually receive less than what they pay through this lump sum transfer, and the poorer deciles, households would receive more. So they would gain from such a system. It's only one way of dealing with this, but in any case, last thing I wanted to add is that
please do.
All policies and measures involve a cost. It only becomes very visible if you talk about an explicit carbon price, of course. If you impose policies and measures more in terms of command and control, if you impose certain standards for housing, for example, or if you impose one way or the other a renovation rate, that of course would mean that households would have to invest, and that also implies a very significant cost, which is less visible and therefore maybe less present in the public debate about whether or not you should impose a carbon price, and has the disadvantage of not generating a revenue for the authorities they can then use to compensate for any negative impacts. That I think is a very important one that tends to be left out of the discussion when we're discussing about whether or not, and the discussion is still ongoing in Belgium, whether or not to impose a carbon price on households.
Sure. So Peter, I mean, one of the dilemmas we've faced in the past 3 years and 2 years in particular now is how in leadership terms, when you're making decisions, you keep the immediate in front of you and you're thinking about having to solve that, whilst you keep the medium to long term in view so you don't make stupid decisions. But it seems like we're in this situation now because stupid decisions were made 5 or 10 years ago. We have a situation where poverty is going to probably go a spike, and energy poverty is going to spike. Given what you've talked about in terms of, the packages to support, they take time. What are you planning to do here in Belgium, if you can say, in the context of what we're seeing as a doubling and tripling of energy prices? And you know what the impact is on the poorest, if you can say. And sorry, I know it's a difficult question, but it's the elephant in the room.
Yes, it is. It is the elephant in the room, but maybe we have to get rid first of the misconception that introducing a carbon price or the existing carbon price is a major part of, or even a part of the problem we're facing now. I mean, the whole energy crisis boils down to the spikes in gas prices essentially. I mean, there are plenty of analysis that show that the the carbon pricing element in energy bills for households, for example, is really quite marginal as compared to that. So let's not falsify, as some do, unfortunately, the debate in those terms. That's an important one. Of course, the usefulness of a carbon price is more oriented towards, as you said, the midterm and the long term. And we have the current crisis, which is of course something we need to deal with. Well, you can still, for example, as my minister has suggested at a certain point in time, use the revenue that is being generated already by the current emission trading scheme and the revenue that will be generated by the ETS BRT. Hopefully it won't be needed because hopefully this energy crisis will be behind us by then. But you can use that also to compensate for the impacts now, which are the results of the spikes in the gas price. Nothing in current legislation, as we understand, that prevents you from also dealing with the social aspect of the energy crisis using the ETS revenues.
Okay, Peter. Well, let's see what happens, because one of the lessons we've learned in the crisis that we've just come through is we've had to be pushed into moving quickly, and we've delayed, and it seems like we can see what's happening right now around us. On top of, let's say, potentially 4 million refugees coming into Europe, and with energy prices as they are, etc., and so forth, and we're just getting back to a sense of not normality, but certainty post-COVID. And then suddenly we had this. So it'll be interesting to see how governments manage and localities manage. I'm going to move to Adrien. Adrien, thank you very much for joining us. Adrien's from Sandbag. And hello.
Hello.
Hi. So my question to you is about carbon pricing as an incentive for, changing behavior of industry, but also trying to maintain a level of competition and competitiveness. So, can it incentivize industry to decarbonize whilst remain being competitive? And there seems to be a kind of a dilemma there, or a contradiction. I don't know. You tell us from your perspective.
Yes, maybe. I mean, I wasn't going to respond to reply to this question like this, but the fact that we touched the point of a distribution of revenues maybe would be a good transition, if you allow me to
of course
start
Thank
with
you.
this point, because there is a lot of revenue, and Peter quite rightly said that when there is revenue raised, there's also increased resources to actually spend it in very sensible ways. I just wanted to point the fact that I mean, this is obviously fluctuating a lot, but at some point recently we had the value, we had valued the total number of allowances in the system during this decade at 1 trillion euros. So the number of EUAs that will be distributed or auctioned in the EU ETS was going to be worth, and I say was because then there was a bit of a market crash. But it's just to give a sense of magnitude. Then of this amount, we found that a lot of it is allocated for free to industry as protection against carbon leakage. There's some of it which is given to the innovation fund to promote innovation, and then there's also quite a sizable amount given as compensation for indirect carbon cost for companies who use a lot of electricity. Then there's a modernization fund, the union budget, which is 25% of the revenues, and the rest of it goes to member states. So it's not really most of the value of the ETS that go to member states. It's actually quite a small amount that go to member states. I wanted to point to this because, of course, there is a lot of social policies that can be implemented, but that will be only possible with the amount that is remaining after all these different sort of cash waterfall. Now back to the question, how do we incentivize industry while not losing competition? It's true that a lot of the limelight has been taken to the power sector, and now we're thinking about the industry sector. And there are a lot of problems with the way the carbon market works for the industry, and a lot of them are related to the allocation method. And the fact that permits are allocated for free to industry creates a lot of problems. I would mention three. the fact that it's an obstacle to decarbonization. So, for example, because there is a free permits given to the cement industry. So if you have the construction sector where concrete, which is made with cement, competes with other materials such as timber, bricks, stone, or other much more less carbon intensive materials, concrete gets basically a subsidy with these free permits, and so the carbon contained in the concrete is not really taken into account in the sort of end the market price of the concrete product. So it's an obstacle to decarbonization. It's an obstacle to innovation as well, because if you have a low carbon technology that could compete with a high carbon technology, but that low carbon technology is not in the ETS because it's low carbon, it is in the ETS, but on a different sort of benchmark, so they receive fewer carbon permits. Then it will not compete at par with the high carbon intensive material. I'm thinking about green hydrogen because it's a very topical material. At the moment, we have calculated and we have developed an online tool to check that on a daily basis. But green hydrogen should be more profitable than grey hydrogen at the moment with the current gas prices, even on the forward basis. So the problem is that grey hydrogen benefits from free permits. So if you have a grey hydrogen facility, then it still may remain profitable because of this free permit. And the third problem with free allocation is that it creates problems in the market because it becomes a highly volatile market when, for example, everything's going well and industries are emitting, but even with high prices, there's no response from the market because the industry gets their permit for free, and so so they keep emitting more with that incentive to reduce. But then, as soon as things go badly, then there is a lot of surplus accumulated that industrials can dump on the market, and that can create really big crashes. So free allocation is a really bad tool for the stability of the market.
Okay.
So this is to say that free allocation is really something that should be, it's an evil that should be fought of very, very urgently. So it is a protection against carbon leakage. So what would you replace free allocation with? Well, there's a number of proposals on the table. The CBAM is obviously on everybody's minds. It is a good way. It should be, it's proposed in a very slow ramp up way, which I think should be accelerated a lot.
Adrien, can I just stop you? Does CBAM address the issues you've just outlined, which I would suggest that you're not really a fan of the ETS, let alone the free allocations of permits, because everything you said would suggest it's a blunt tool that's not taking us anywhere. But does CBAM does it address the issues that you've just said that the free allocation of the permit doesn't tackle?
Well, if considered as a replacement for free allocation, yes. And this was the spirit of the Commission proposal. In one of the recitals, it does say that free allocation would be replaced by the CBAM, or the CBAM should be as a replacement to free allocation. It shouldn't cohabit, it should be a replacement.
I'm really interested to see. I'm trying to read Beatrice's face in the text. I can't because the screen is too far in terms of how she's reacting to what you're saying. Because basically what you're saying is that a fundamental aspect of the ETS is dud, because it's rewarding those who continue to emit, it's not having an impact in terms of making sure people do the right thing. And my goodness, go figure, cement is treated like wood and everything else. How can that be possibly the right thing to do? So I will bring you back, Beatriz, don't worry, in a moment to respond to what I've heard. But it would be interesting to know from both EDF, our colleagues and others, what do you think what should we do differently? And Adrien, you've been really helpful in saying this is where it's not working and why it's not working. And you're pegging your hopes on CBAM, but let's see. I'm going to pick on a couple of people. I don't see any hands up, but I noticed we've got Jirki Katainen. Jirki, you there? Because how can I not bring in the next Vice President of the European Commission into this conversation? I know you're in the private sector, etc. So, hello, good to see you.
Very good to see you.
Long time no see. I hope you're well. Listen, Jirki, what's your take on the debate that we're having right now? What's you've been there, you've been in the thralls of having to make difficult decisions. What's your reaction to what you've heard so far?
Well, maybe only one additional point to what already has been said is that taking into account the current security policy situation in Europe, there is nothing positive. But if you want to, or if you try to find any positive implications of the Ukrainian situation, is that now we have one additional strong argument to make a green transition in energy sector. So nobody wants to be dependent on Russian fossil fuels anymore. Actually, this is a very simple notion, but this argument was not used 3 weeks ago, but now everybody's using it. So I would not make any drastic changes to the EU Green Deal or Fit for 55 programs or ETS system more than what has been planning to do. Okay. Now we have a strong case, one additional strong argument why we should continue on this path. But I very much agree with those who have highlighted that the transition must be just, and the current situation at the moment makes it even more difficult than before. But there's no reason to change the direction. On the other hand, on the contrary, actually.
But Jirki, you've been vice president of the commission. You know that speed matters, and one of I know that people like yourselves who've been in the commission have always been frustrated that we wish we could move faster. We've seen speed now in terms of COVID. What you just heard from Adrien about the fact that we should be switching to green hydrogen really quickly. We should be creating on an industrial scale a renewable capacity in Europe if we're going to really make this happen. Do you get? I mean, is that what you would say that we should do? Is in terms of like we built hospitals and created a vaccine in the fastest time ever in our history? We're really looking into an energy crisis of mammoth proportions, both in terms of pricing but also security. What would you do?
Well, we have a momentum now. We already, before this current crisis, decided what do we want to achieve, and the direction in the market won't change. On the contrary, now there are, as I said before, now we have even stronger argument why to continue on this path we have chosen to become more sustainable in our energy production. So the momentum is now, and of course we cannot change everything overnight, but in 3 years from now on, we can be very far in sustainable transition if we started right now. So I believe that there are, the energy market is also changing partially because of the shortages of energy, and there are new incentives for private sector to invest in technologies which we didn't which were not necessarily as profitable before the crisis. So this is probably the only positive thing I see in this current situation.
Jirki, thank you very much, as ever. Very wise and insightful. Thank you for responding to my challenging questions, and take care. Good to see you. I'm going to bring in Nuno. Nuno, who's Nuno Lacasta. If you're still there, again, I can't resist the temptation of seeing that there's a CEO of a Portuguese energy company, but no, he's left. What a shame. That's a pity. Perhaps he knew I was going to pick on him. but not to worry. Just, I want to come back to a question from citizens from our Debating Europe Citizens platform. And the question I have is to you, Alexandre, and it's from Jose from Spain. And he says, if Russia shuts down gas to the EU tomorrow, how will we produce energy? Over to you, Alexandre.
Very good question. Well, first, I think the was referred to earlier in the debate, the Commission has published a communication last Tuesday, which aims at reducing the gas import from Russia by 2/3 by the end of 2022. A very ambitious goal, and we support these long-term measures. But I think it's been alluded to as well. We have a fantastic opportunity to accelerate the deployment of renewables, and to further accelerate the electrification of the economy. We think that all low carbon technologies should be taken into account, of course, renewables, but also the role of nuclear. We think is going to be crucial in this future system, and should be acknowledged. So first, accelerate the transition to the electrification of energy uses. There's two main streams on which we could work: direct electrification, for instance, for mobility. Maybe we could set new targets for clean mobility. Targets for energy renovation, with a switch from fossil-based heating to efficient electricity-based heating, especially with heat pumps. And then there's the indirect electrification, mainly through hydrogen for the hard-to-abate sectors, as we call them. And they were discussed a bit earlier: cement, steel. But also, sectors that are emerging as possible candidates for this indirect electrification, such as aviation fuels. And of course, in doing so, you need to accelerate the deployment of renewables, not only wind and solar, but also to recognize the key role that hydropower plays. And the picture in my background is here to remind everyone of that in a European power system, hydropower is key, and of course nuclear. We need that mix of decarbonized power generation mode to ensure that our power system is as resilient as possible. And that we enhance the sovereignty of our energy system.
Sure, good points. But when I did my very first climate energy conference for Friends of Europe, we had Fatih Birol 6 years ago, who said, beware of what's coming ahead and diversify energy sources. Do not rely on one, and try and make sure you get into energy efficiency and carbon capture, storage, etc. And we didn't listen. We're now in this situation. What signal do you need from your government or the European Commission for this acceleration to take place? Is it more money, or do we redirect what's coming through the recovery fund to make this happen?
I think it's all of the above. First, as we said at the beginning, in those sectors that we just discussed, the key signal is the signal coming from the EU ETS as a basis for making sound decisions, sound capital allocation decisions, and then it needs to be well articulated with possible support measures directed at specific sectors, and trying to make sure that we don't have we don't create biases. Adrien was alluding to the issue of hydrogen production, saying that with gas prices where they are right now, green hydrogen prices is on par with grey hydrogen. but for the fact that gray hydrogen still benefits from free allocation. So this is something that needs to be looked into. Clearly.
When you say looked into, let me just ask you more directly. Do you mean you need to switch the allocation system so you actually incentivize green versus grey?
You need to level the playing field between the two.
Okay. All right. Okay. Sure. I understand your situation, but thank you very much. But it feels as if we do need to flip it. You either are taking the situation, not you personally, but we as government society, either taking the problem seriously or not. We can't be mealy-mouthed about it. You cannot give cement the same kind of rewards or, green doors out or keys that you give others that are low carbon emitters. And sometimes we just need to call a spade, but we seem to not do that, unfortunately. I'm going to take another citizen's question that we have, and this time goes to you, Adrien. And it's from Andrej from Slovakia. And he asks, in the short term, we will need to reopen nuclear plants that had been phased out. Will we need to do that?
Well,
over to you.
I think when you look into ways of decarbonizing, anywhere you look, you will need more electricity. You need more low carbon electricity for the power sector because a lot of it runs on gas and coal. But you need also electricity to decarbonize industry because, as Alexandre said, you need a lot of electrification. You even, for circularity in the steel sector, for example, if you want to use more scrap metal, then you will use electric arc furnaces to melt this scrap and make circular steel. So that's more electricity. And what can't be electrified, you will require hydrogen. And so hydrogen can be made in different ways. Maybe some people thought that it could be made of natural gas and with CCS, and that is called green hydrogen. Blue hydrogen. And this now is looking less and less possible with the natural gas prices and anyway the need to go off Russian gas as quickly as possible. So if you don't use natural gas, then it's going to be again electricity with electrolyzers. So anyway, you'll need more electricity. And I'd like to say that we can be picky and only choose the low carbon electricity from renewable sources, and that would be great if we could do that. But right now, if we have lots of nuclear power plants that are there and available, I think that would be an option definitely to look into as well.
Okay, so you don't treat that with with loathing, that actually once you open it up, you won't be able to go back because of the whole conversation around nuclear. You think it's okay to do it for the time being and take the risk of it perhaps becoming part of our energy mix in the future.
Well, at least right now, it's better than coal and gas. That's definitely.
Indeed. Okay, thanks a lot, Adrien. And I want to bring back all our speakers to the question that Doug asked, which we haven't asked, which we haven't really answered. None of you have answered. Is that what do you do with the money that comes out of the system, the ETS, in terms of the point being made in the UK, it suddenly goes back into the national budget, but shouldn't it actually be ring fenced to have better incentivization of decarbonisation, perhaps even also to support households? So I want to go back to that. And also on the chat, we have Peter's made a really good point about, when we rush into discussions or we look at different options, let's absolutely thoroughly investigate the stress test, the positives and negatives. And so that's why I posed the question about nuclear, but there's also the thing about renewables. And he makes the point that if we rush into renewables, there's going to be taxpayers, but actually the only response I have to you, and perhaps our other speakers can come back to, is that if we get renewables right, it has a number of geopolitical, but also sustainability impacts, which are more long-term if we get it right. So there we go. I'm going to go back to Peter. Peter, if I may, and I'm going to wind down now because I've only got 8 minutes before I go back to Alexandre and Beatriz. Peter, what's your answer to the notion of ring fencing the benefits of the ETS? The question that Doug raised. What are you doing in Belgium?
Well, I can't go into all the details of what all we're doing, but we are ring fencing to some extent, for sure. And if you look at what's on the table now in the context of the Fit for 55 package, we will be ring fencing if the Commission's proposals are accepted. Everything we generate in terms of national revenue. The whole introductory remarks I made was actually based on that, on ring fencing, to use the word again, part of the revenue to compensate for any social impacts, but part of the revenue, of course, would also have to go to helping those in our economies and societies that need it to prepare themselves for the mid and the long term, to help them make the investments that are needed. So from where I stand, ring fencing is definitely an essential part of the solution.
Okay, Peter, thank you very much. We look forward to see your plans in Belgium and see how it maps out in the next few months and years to come. Back to you, for an EDF perspective on the question, Alexandre, and any final remarks you have, because you made some really good points around, what we need to do in terms of hydrogen and the kind of incentives that we have at play. But what's your view on ring fencing, the benefits of the ETS system for not necessarily going back into the national budget, if you can say?
I'm only going to be repeating what has just been said before. I think just transition, and you said it yourself, just transition is key. So, we need to make sure that we dedicate the right amount of resources to making sure that everyone can afford that transition. When I said earlier that the electrification is the way, it is, but it will come with consequences. We can see that all governments at the moment are trying to find a way to mitigate the impact of electricity prices at the level where they are. At the moment for final. This just shows that in the long run, this issue has to be addressed, and part of the funds need to be used in a way so that to ensure that just transition. We're doing our bit at EDF. Even before the crisis, we decided to stop cutting off people who cannot afford to pay their bills.
Okay.
We think that there's a number of ways the market could be reformed, so that we were talking about the energy markets. We were talking about for the carbon market, the concept of possible price corridors. Similar structures could be imagined for the power sector, around CFDs for generators with knock-on benefits for consumers, with really one goal or two goals: providing more predictability for investors and making sure that transition is affordable to everyone. And if I had one concluding remark, because you hinted to that.
Yes.
We less than 2 weeks ago exactly, we had the latest IPCC reports on the impacts of climate change, which tell us two things. First, that the climate change is a long-term one. This one we knew. But that it also requires extremely urgent action. This is not new, but the arguments that have been made in the report are even more compelling than what they were before. So, the IPCC tells us that we will be reaching adaptation limits very quickly. So, strong and urgent mitigation is needed for adaptation to be possible. So in that context, it's really important to safeguard the EU ETS as the cornerstone of the EU climate policy. It's been said by Beatriz. I said it before, I say it again. We finally have a tool that enables decarbonization at the scale which is required to reach our climate targets. We have an ambitious reform on the table, which is absolutely needed, and we believe it's critically important to preserve the system's continued success. The ETS is working. Let's keep on improving it, and let's refrain from the temptation to undermine the hard-won credibility by adding unpredictability in the design of the system.
Alexandre, that will be, that's good, because after what's been said before, that's going to make Beatriz smile, and as I come to you in a moment. But, I'm so glad you raised the point of the IPCC report, because there's two things that occur to me, is that our political leaders need to hold two realities in their heads. One is what's happening immediately to our lives and the insecurity of both energy and other matters, but also to make decisions on investment at speed and scale in terms of adaptation. And the clock is right, the time is running out and the clock is ticking. And we've been again, for the past 10 years, we've been hearing this message. Let's hope that our political leaders actually listen to the reality of the fact that adaptation time is running out, and then we'll only have ourselves or them to blame. Beatriz, over to you for the final words on this discussion and debate, which has been rich. React to what you've heard so far about the ETS, especially about the free allocations and the permits, but also the point that's been made by Doug around, ring fencing, and any final concluding points from your side. Over to you,
First, very interesting discussion, and I agree with many points, clearly with Kiri Katainen points, but with many of the points. Just to remind of last week figures, we import from Russia 155 billion cubic meters of gas. The Green Deal will mean that we will get rid of 100 billion cubic meters. So the acceleration of the Green Deal is key, and I think that let's concentrate on that. On the use of revenues, I mean, absolutely, we have tried to put more transparency, ring fence. I don't know if the ring fence is the exact expression, but clearly transparency. And in the new proposal that is on the table, we propose that 100% of the revenues are used for climate purposes. This is not only important for investment of the green transition, but also that the citizens know where the polluting money goes. On the last years, it's not that we are waking up now. We are not waking up now. We have diminishing a reduction of the emissions since the 90s of more than 40% in the ETS sectors, with economic growth of more than 50%. So it's not that we are waking up now, but clearly we will need to accelerate. And on the free allocations, I will not say that it's evil, but I would say that free allocation, it has been a measure to protect our industry for trade exposure. It's a trade exposure that we had before CBAM, before a border adjustment mechanism is in place. And as you know, the Commission says when we will have the CBAM, the external instrument in place, we will need to take out the free allocation. So it has been, our industry has been exposure to trade, and we know Europe emits 9% of global emissions, and others need to take also measures. On green and grey hydrogen, you are completely right. This is why we propose that we have an equivalence by product, and that green hydrogen is not penalized. Also, let me do a little bit of advertisements. What we propose also in this new ETS is that 1/4 of the free allocation depend on what we call conditionality, meaning that industries invest in energy efficiency measures. And just to finish, because it's a very interesting point, my last point is that when we talk about regression and social regression. Just to say that Green Deal is compatible with progression. Just in households terms, the 20% poorest households in Europe are responsible for 9% of the emissions in building and transport, while the 20% richer households are responsible for more than 30% of the emissions. So just to close, please, with this geopolitical situation, let's go for a further Green Deal.
Excellent. I'm glad you made that point, because it's the one thing that I think that runs as a thread through all our work at Friends of Europe is that how do you, close the gap, inequality gap, and the kind of look at poverty and economic inequality in the eye and do something about it dramatically, because those who can afford to heat and pay are the higher estimators, and those who can't afford are suffering the most. And so we need to be able to close that gap and make our Europe a much more level, but also equal playing field, especially for those who are in the hardest circumstances. And my only concern, our only concern, is that both energy security and energy supply are going to be conflated. And unfortunately, it's the poorest that are going to suffer the most in our next few weeks. I just hope that member states, municipalities can work in the same speed that they did during the coronavirus situation to actually make sure that people have a buffer. And like we heard from EDF, you're not switching people off. You're not cutting people off that can't afford their bill. But at some point, the cushioning of citizen support or individual support is going to have to come to an end, because until when do you keep on borrowing? And those are going to be big questions about economic theory and how we get ourselves out of not only the debt that's been accumulated during COVID, but now also in terms of how governments are going to be able to make sense of this crisis, which isn't over yet. Colleagues, I hope you found that interesting, stimulating, and engaging. And there's more to come, obviously, but thanks to all our speakers for being very frank and direct. And I hope that you've taken something away in terms of what some of the potential solutions are, that we've demystified some of the ETS and where actually it could be improved. And thanks to all of you for engaging fully and frankly, and see you again very soon. And if if you're minded and interested, this Wednesday morning, you can join me again. I'll be moderating an event on trade and diplomacy, the nexus of the two for the future of Europe. So that's all left for me to say is thank you all very much. Take care, mind your distance, and be safe. Bye-bye.